The United States, a so-called nation under God.
The dark streets of America were plagued by a new enemy, fentanyl. A synthetic opioid painkiller so powerful, it claimed more lives than the Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan wars combined. It was like a deadly virus, seeping into every city and town, taking over the lives of anyone who dared to use it. And with each passing day, its grip tightened even further. Children as young as 10 were falling victim to fentanyl's deadly embrace, their deaths increasing by a staggering 182%. But even adults were not safe from its clutches. It was now the leading cause of death for Americans ages 18 to 49. The government tried to combat its spread with awareness campaigns and life-saving medication like Narcan, but it seemed like a losing battle. The drug dealers didn't care about the destruction they caused, only interested in making a profit off of people's addictions. Fentanyl flooded the streets, readily available on the illicit market. In just 2 milligrams, this lethal drug could end a person's life. In Texas, overdose deaths involving fentanyl rose by nearly 400% in just 2 years. And it wasn't just fentanyl alone. Oftentimes, it was mixed with other drugs, causing what they called polysubstance overdoses. The death toll continued to rise, and no one seemed to have an answer on how to stop it. It was a race against time as law enforcement scrambled to take down the ruthless drug lords responsible for spreading this poison. Lives hung in the balance as the streets became a battleground between those fighting for justice and those profiting off of misery. One thing was certain: in this war against fentanyl, there would be no winners, only casualties. But amidst all the chaos and despair, there was still hope that one day, this nightmare would come to an end. Welcome to No Tears for Black Girls, the riveting true crime podcast, created, written, and produced by acclaimed author John Reedburg. I'm your host, Samantha Paul, and if you want to join us in supporting the show, simply download the Alive Podcast app. Make sure to also subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on social media at No Tears for Black Girls and at No Tears for BG on X. Now, let's begin. The first tale begins with the death of a 47-year-old man, Cedric Cannon, discovered lifeless on May 29, 2021, in his home. The culprit? Fentanyl. His sister, Rashetta Cannon, shares her harrowing account of losing her brother to this deadly substance, issuing a warning about the dangers of illicit fentanyl. In our second story, we delve into the tragic loss of Dr. Karen Jackson through the perspective of her grieving sister, Cedric Calloway.
So I'm here to talk about my brother, Cedric Cannon, who was my older brother, who I lost to fentanyl. We grew up in a small town in Florida. It was 5 girls and 2 boys. Cedric was the third oldest. He was the oldest son. We grew up in a low-income housing, single-parent household, but we had a lot of love and we had a lot of joy. It was always fun and something amazing to do growing up. My fondest memories of Cedric, he loved the Lakers, and he always had this Lakers jersey in the closet, and I would open the closet and I would always want to wear his jersey. I loved it. And I loved when he would take me around with his friends, like hanging out with them, playing basketball, and he was very protective over us. He really loved us. And he also loved wrestling. So any of the latest wrestling moves, he would always practice on the younger siblings. So we were the guinea pigs. And so those are the memories that I remember, him setting up the Nintendo for us to play. My mom said as a child, he loved to go to church. My mom, she was a Sunday school teacher for many years. She still actually goes to the same church that we grew up in. So she's been there over 40 years. So we always had that foundation in the church. Even in Cedric's addiction, he always carried that with him. He never lost that. And my mom said when he was a little boy, he would always carry this little Bible around with him. And he loved going to church. And in school, he was very comical. Like, he was a good kid. He was obedient, but he loved to make people laugh. He was kind of like, they would say he was like the class clown. My mom said about when she ended up marrying my stepfather. Cedric was about 19 at the time, she said. And then he, moved out at the time. He started experimenting with drugs. And that began his downward spiral with addiction. I don't remember exactly what age, but I remember one of my siblings mentioning that, my brother was on drugs. And I remember I didn't want to believe it. I was in complete denial. And I was like, if I don't deal with this, it's not true. And because I wasn't around him all of the time, I went off to college, and it made it easy to just not believe that it was true. As I got, older, I would notice different things, but he was never like the stereotypical, if you see somebody and you say, oh, I can tell they're an addict. Even, before he passed, he never had the typical, addict, whatever that stereotype is. He never had that. Like, he never looked to me like an addict. But our family, like people that are close to us, we would know, like he would ask for money or he would do certain things. There was, that comes with addiction. And the thing about it, we're from a really small town. So if you're doing something, if you're, word gets around. So that was another thing. We're from a small town. People start talking. And then also, too, he was open about it as well. Like, he wouldn't hide his addiction. He was open about it.
Hey, I'm not no preacher. And I'm not so filled with the Holy Ghost and living perfect or nothing. But I need help. You know what I'm saying? And I figure a lot of y'all need help too. A lot of y'all be liking some of my posts and be seeing a lot of things that I write on Facebook, and I don't want nobody to never think that I'm holier than thou or and got that type of attitude. I'm just a person who I like to fellowship with those who may feel where I'm coming from or may understand the spiritual warfare that goes along with those who are trying to seek Christ. So if you got any problems or you got any issues that you're going through and you need somebody to talk to, I'm here for you. You know what I'm saying? You can inbox me. You know what I'm saying? I see my number, or we can talk on to Messenger, whatever, man. It does a lot to help my soul. And it uplifts my spirit, the fellowship with those who are suffering or those who have testimony. So I'm just throwing it out there for anybody who might feel that this is for anyone. Don't feel embarrassed or none of that. I'm an open book. I don't got nothing to hide. So God just put it on my heart to put this out there. So feel welcome if you want to. God bless us.
My sister said that he told her at 17, that's when he started experimenting with drugs with a family member. And so she said, I don't know when this was, but there was a certain time, she was in the car, they were riding together, and he broke down to her and he said that he didn't want that life for himself. But, it's just one of those things that he just didn't know how to get free from. And it just kind of followed him for the rest of his life until it ended his life. I asked my mom when she found out, and she said it was not until years later because she never noticed any differences in his behavior or, and she was so clueless, like drugs. We didn't deal with anybody in our family with drugs, so that wasn't on the radar. It was nothing that we would be looking for or pick up on any cues. So it really blindsided her that this was an issue. So at first, I know at a time that he was addicted to cocaine. And then I know at one point it was crack. And then at the time of his death, his autopsy report said it was meth toxicity and fentanyl toxicity. So I'm not sure when, he started diving into other things. And right before he passed, my niece was taking him somewhere and she was talking to him about fentanyl, and he told her, no, I don't do that. I don't do that. And so I know it wasn't something that he was out looking for, or even though he had battled with addiction, we had heard about other people in our hometown that had died from fentanyl, and he was, telling my sister about it, like, hey, this guy that we all knew from our hometown, like, can you believe, like, this guy, he passed away? And they were like, oh, that's so sad. So just a little backstory. So many things were happening leading up into his death. One of my nieces, she used to do like this prayer line with her friends. And she invited my brother to, hey, I want you to get on this prayer call. And he said, like, all day he was trying to get out of the house. He was, trying to get out. But for whatever reason, he couldn't leave that day. So he said, okay, I'll get on this prayer call. And so they ended up like praying for him, and they had him read Psalm 91. And he was like, oh, this was awesome. I'm going to come back on the next night. Well, the next night, nobody could find him. Nobody could get a hold of him for a couple days. When he was found, they believe he had already been gone for 2 days. And that was so devastating to know that, he died alone. That was hard for me and my mom because we both felt that way, like he had to die alone. And growing up, my mom, she was really strong, having 7 kids and doing the best that she could. And I never saw my mom cry. And the first time I saw my mom cry was at my brother's wake. And so this is what fentanyl does to people. So that was very hard to see my mom, cry. It's like all of our lives, like once we found out he had an addiction, it's like you're holding your breath because you're dreading getting that call. And when you finally get the call, it's like your worst nightmare. It finally happened that you never wanted to happen. It came true. I've lost people before, but this is just so different when it's your sibling, when it's to something that's like an addiction that this person has wanted to get out of and they can't, and you don't know how to help. Like when I found out about this, I was so young. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to deal with it. And one of the things that I would want people to get from this story is that if you have a loved one that's, is an addict, I built up a lot of walls kind of to protect myself. And I was afraid to, fully, I think, love him because I was afraid of, when we would get that call. But I think what I wish I would have done differently was just to love him more, tell him I love him more, ask him about his story, ask him, why did you do this? Like, not in a judgmental way, but just trying to understand. Even though I could never understand an addict, I can never understand what their struggles are, but I wish I would have tried to understand his perspective and his struggles and let him know that, I was there for him. I was supporting him, not his addiction, not saying to enable them, but just, I think it has to be a balance. You don't want to enable them, but you also want them to know that, I still love you. And he was so loving. Like, of course, with addicts, it's difficult sometimes. The lying, they can manipulate, asking for money, so it can be very easy to build up walls. But I think there has to be the balance of the compassion as well. knowing that most people don't set out to be addicts. They don't, want this life, but it's so hard to get out. So that's why it's don't even start. Don't try anything. Don't start it. Don't do it. So the investigation really didn't go too far. I feel like, as I hear with a lot of cases, it's kind of like, once it's found that they've passed from fentanyl, it's closed book, it's over. And that's basically how it was. It was no further investigation really after that. Cedric, just like a lot of addicts, they're not just addicts. They're more than that, He was very loving, and he had a lot of friends. He loved people. He had a heart for people. And he was so forgiving. Like, you can get into an argument with Ced, and he would forgive you. And he would always talk about love. And like I said, of course he was not perfect. Addiction comes with a lot of stuff. And it can be so hard to deal with addicts. Cedric was hard to deal with sometimes. But he had such a great heart. He was somebody's brother. He was my brother. He was my mom's son. So he was just so much more. And I want people to know that he was more than an addict. And he had so much to offer this world. Even in his addiction and being around people with addiction, he would still try to help them. Even though he couldn't help himself, he would still try to speak life into them and try to help them to get out. And so many people, like after he passed, like on his Facebook page, is so many like messages of how he touched people, like how he encouraged people. He never lost that. And that's what I want people to know about him.
Cedric Calloway.
When you think about substance abuse, you never think that it will happen to your family. And when it hit our family the way it did with my sister, I promised myself that I would get the word out that the opioid addiction does not discriminate. It happens to the least of us to the most of us. My sister was a doctor. She had her PhD in education. She was a minister, just the person who you would least suspect to be addicted to opiates. People need to understand that the opioid addiction is a physiological addiction. So just like I crave water, it's the same way people who have the addiction with opiates, they crave the drug. Initially, my sister was prescribed opiates for knee and back pain. I really believe that she wasn't able to get the prescriptions by doctors anymore, so she turned to the next best thing that she could to get that fix. And that's when she started reaching out to negative influences and drug dealers. I'm a federal probation officer. I deal with this kind of stuff all the time. But when it happened in my family, it caught us all by surprise. My sister and I were extremely close. We were best friends. If you saw her, you saw me. And when it hit so close to home, I make referrals to drug treatment all the time. I never in a million years thought that I would have to do this for my sister. But I did. And it was tough, but the addiction was so powerful. She was in a lot of denial. She did a lot of deflecting. She pointed the finger at other things going on, but she never accepted responsibility. And it was very hard. She was such a strong human being. She was my rock. She was my everything. She always came to my rescue. She was more than, just a big sister. Like, she would tell anybody, don't mess with my sister. That's the kind of person she was. So when this happened, I think in my mind, I thought, well, I knew that she would be able to beat this. If anybody could beat this, Karen could beat it. And so when COVID hit and everybody was on lockdown, there were signs, but I didn't recognize those signs until after the fact. I had to go through grief counseling because 6 months prior to her dying, I had already lost her. And I had already lost her. So I actually started going through grief counseling because I knew at that point there was nothing else I could do. My sister was very charismatic, and my sister was a very strong motivational speaker, a very powerful minister. And she knew that Bible inside and out. And when she started to use scripture to justify some of the things she had done, I knew this isn't Karen. This is not my sister. Because she was the type of person, she didn't tolerate foolishness. She didn't tolerate, people making dumb mistakes. Her thing was, you're doing this because you want to do it, and I'm not going to be a part of it. That's the kind of person she was. And so when her addiction got exposed, I started noticing that she's not accepting responsibility for the addiction. Karen, I think, was dealing with some depression. I think that she was just going through a lot. And so when she died, my husband and I was like, everybody's blaming everybody, but nobody's blaming Karen. And it's not something that Karen wanted. I know she didn't. I know my sister did not want to die. But the drug was just so powerful. And because she was such a strong person, weakness just was not in her vocabulary. It just wasn't. And so probably to admit that I'm weak, I'm powerless against this addiction, she just couldn't do it. She did go in substance abuse treatment once, though. I was so proud of her. She was weaned off of the pills, and things were going great. Things were really going great, but she relapsed. And so when she relapsed, when the conversation was, I've been calling my counselor, but she's not calling me back. Okay, now the probation officer hat is kicking in. Okay, yeah. And she would say it over and over, and she would be so convincing. Oh my gosh, she would be so convincing. I've been calling that counselor, and that counselor's not been calling me back. And so finally, I just had to tell her, okay. So she was sick. I was at work and got a phone call that the paramedics were at her house and they couldn't resuscitate her. And her husband had come home from work, working a night job. He came home from work and found her passed out, unresponsive. She was gone. Yeah, she was gone. There were pills. And what she would always do is, to intensify the high, she would take her pills with wine. And that's literally how she was found. That's how she died. She died at home. Yeah. When you buy drugs from a drug dealer, you don't know what you're getting. And so essentially that's what happened. When I got a copy of her death certificate, it said on there fentanyl, alcohol, Xanax, and hydrocodone. And the reason on her death certificate, it said substance abuse. So that's how she died. And I know she did not commit suicide because that was not Karen. But I do believe she overdosed because she didn't know what she was getting. I think we didn't talk about it like we probably should have because of pride. And that is the worst thing to deal with when you're dealing with someone with substance abuse. You have to push the pride to the side. You can't be embarrassed because it happens. It happens.
Thank you for tuning in to No Tears for Black Girls, now a part of the Alive Podcast Network, the first Black female-owned and operated network dedicated to amplifying Black voices. If you enjoyed this episode, please show your support by following us on the Alive Podcast app, available on both iPhone and Android. You can also stay connected with us on social media and YouTube at No Tears for Black Girls, or on X at No Tears for BG. Remember to stay loved, stay blessed, and stay safe. Until next time.